Greetings and welcome to the Saved as Draft podcast, where... oh, excuse me. Whew, something stuck in my throat there. Could you imagine if that's what the entire podcast sounded like? I like doing voices, so as I get more comfortable with this, you may hear them more often than not. But enough of that. Welcome to episode 2 of the Saved as Draft podcast, where I, Bradley Ramsey, talk to you about what it's like to be a writer, what I'm working on, and why you should care. Welcome to episode 2, everyone. This week I got ghosted, hence the name of the episode. And I know what you're thinking, oh, was it a dating thing? No, it was not. Although that has happened to me in the past. Thankfully, I am no longer dealing with any of that. As I mentioned on the last episode, Sarah and I have been dating for a year, and I do not miss having to comb through those apps in the hopes of meeting somebody because I work from home and I never go anywhere. And so that was the only way to meet people. Anyway, long story short, not dating, did get ghosted. What ended up happening is I saw a post from a film studio, which will remain unnamed, on Threads, I believe it was. And they were asking for writers. And they mentioned that they don't have any capital, but they're super excited and they're just getting started and so on and so forth. And particularly, they were looking for horror. And you know me, you may not know me, but once you get to know me, you'll know that I am a horror writer, first and foremost, even though I do experiment with other genres. So I was really excited. As a creative, it sounded really cool. So I reached out to them. They were super responsive at first. They were asking for some samples, and then we scheduled a Zoom meeting. I sent them a Zoom link because they didn't send me anything. And the day came, and I got on Zoom, and then I saw an email from them that said, hey, something came up. We need to reschedule for tomorrow. And I said, okay, sure, no problem. So I did. Reschedule, that is. And then the next day I get on, and crickets. I sat on that Zoom call for 30 minutes just waiting around. And I learned a couple of things here. Number one, and I already knew this, but it was a reminder, don't take unpaid writing gigs, okay? People always talk about exposure and stuff, and while that's really important, I know better, and other writers should know better too, that your time is worth paying for, okay? The work that you do is worth paying for. It doesn't matter how experienced you are. It doesn't matter how long you've been doing it. If you're working, you should get paid. All of that aside, it probably worked out for the best. I'm not saying that they're trying to scam anybody or anything. It was just, a reminder to value my time a bit more, especially for something like that. All right, next up, we have 22 subscribers now on Substack specifically. I have subscribers elsewhere on Vocal, for example, where I'm almost at 100 actually. But 22 subscribers on Substack after just starting out is incredible. So thank you. Huge shout out to everyone who subscribes. Really appreciate you jumping in early and getting on board with this while I kind of get everything started and I'm figuring it all out. And that includes the people listening to the podcast. I love the analytics on Substack because you can see kind of where people are coming from and what countries that they're in when they're listening. And I'm seeing people from, I think I saw Sweden and Finland. And obviously the US, I can't remember the other countries. I'll write them down once we get some more listens and downloads so that we can kind of, talk about the global audience here. But that's really cool, really exciting. Thank you for that. And as part of my Substack, kind of part of the intro here, I wanted to also shout out a number of writers on Substack who I've either interacted with or received feedback from, or as you'll find out later, featured in a recent article. So those writers are as follows, in no particular order: Brianna Wheeler, Spencer D.W., Odessa Blaine, Sean Tom McDonnell, Charlie Lentine, Matt Lillywhite, and J.M. Goki. Thank you so much. It's been an incredible journey so far, but you all have been extremely welcoming and super supportive, and I cannot thank you enough. Also want to shout out to the person on Blue Sky who actually reached out to me and said that they listened to episode 1 of the podcast. I tried to find your screen name so I could give you a shout out on here, but I am way too active on Blue Sky. I was scrolling and did not find you, but you know who you are, and I just wanted to say thank you as well for being an early fan of the podcast. And to wrap up the intro here, if you want to be featured in my weekly shout out, especially as this gets rolling, please let me know. Send me something you're working on. Give me a pitch for your book, poetry, even just any kind of art in general, whether it's music or paintings or drawings or sketches. I love art. I love consuming art. I love talking about art. So send me what you got, and I would be more than happy to provide a shout out. All right, next up, this week in writing. We have a lot going on. I was writing the list of things that happened this week, and I'm sitting here going, how did I have the time for this? I mean, as many of you may already know, I work in marketing during the day. I've got a full-time job. I love my team. We stay busy. It's specifically in software supply chain technology. So it's actually pretty fascinating once you get into the industry, and it's more complex than you would think. But I can't believe that I got so much writing done outside of work. But to be honest, I've been spending a lot of my free time writing lately, which not a bad thing, especially because I spent a few months leading up to the end of 2024 just really not being in the writing mood or having writer's block. So it's good stuff. So let's go down the list. Number 1 is Blue Pit over on Blue Sky. I mentioned this last week on the podcast, and it was great. I've done a couple of pitch events like this one. The way that they work is you typically will put together a mood board or some sort of visual aspect, and then you'll write up a kind of a one-post pitch for your project. And so that's kind of what Blue Pit was. Had a lot of great feedback from people on my upcoming cosmic horror novel, For Those About to Vote is the title. And I saw a ton of great pitches too. I was really trying to get on there and kind of it's not retweet because it's Blue Sky, repost, I guess, as many pitches as I could because I want to support my fellow writers, obviously. And there was just a lot of really good stuff on there. Plenty of things that I would read. Plenty. So overall, it was a really great event. I did 2 pitches. You're allowed to do up to 3. My first pitch was a mood board combined with just an overall sort of high-level look at the novel. And then my second pitch that I did later in the day was a look at the 6 POVs in the book. I have 6 different characters that it kind of jumps between. So I found some stock images. Unsplash, shout out, great resource. Found some images that kind of looked like the people I envisioned in my head for each of the POVs, and then a little kind of breakdown of who they are and what they got going on in the story. Overall, it was really great. Really liked Blue Pit. Thank you to all the writers who supported, and looking forward to doing more of those. So I published a number of short stories, and I believe it was 1 poem this week, looking at the list here. Now, I cheated a little bit because a number of these pieces were actually written probably about 2 years ago now. And they were written before I had a really bad time in my personal life. And so they've been kind of sitting on my drive and they never really got published anywhere. So this past week, I, with fresh eyes and a new perspective, went back and took a look at them, revamped them, edited, rewrote, added some stuff, and then decided to publish them. So I'm going to run through that list real quick in case anybody's curious, and I will include these links in the show notes. First and foremost was a flash fiction piece called Ashes to Ashes. This one I published on Vocal. It'll eventually get published on Substack, but for now it's on Vocal. This one, the premise is 2 people meeting each other right when the star in their solar system goes supernova. So it's kind of this singular moment. It's very heavy, very emotional. I also did some interesting stuff with the structure of it where I had kind of a second narrator pop in every couple paragraphs that was written in italics. I'll let you decide what you think of that, and I would love to hear your feedback. Next up is The Soul's Ambrosia, which for right now is also on Vocal. This is a poem that I did, the concept being, let's write something from the perspective of some sort of entity that only exists when others are being creative. So whenever you're being creative, this thing is kind of there, maybe providing support, maybe just watching, who knows, but it can only exist when creativity is happening. So it's just kind of this weird sort of supernatural poem. But I got some good comments on it, and I think it's pretty cool. So that one's also on Vocal. Next up, we've got another flash fiction piece called Genesis. This one's super interesting. So the way that it started, the original draft of it was a piece about 2 sort of futuristic astronaut type people, and they're flinging themselves into a black hole for reasons that you'll find out if you read the story. and they get separated as they go through this crazy journey into the black hole. And what ends up happening is one character arrives about, I think it's 50 years before the other character arrives, because, you know, I'm going to nerd out here for a second, so feel free to fast forward, like, I don't know, 45 seconds. But one thing that I love about black holes and space in general is just how interesting all the science is, and the fact that we don't know much of anything is also very intriguing as a writer. So with black holes, there's a phenomenon called time dilation, and if you've never seen the movie Interstellar with Matthew McConaughey, I highly recommend it. Incredible film, but they do a really good job of explaining it in that movie. Long story short, because I'm not a scientist or a physicist, is that black holes can warp space and time because they have such a strong gravitational pull. And so that means that when you're near a black hole within that gravitational area, time actually moves in a different speed than if you were outside of that, right? I know that sounds bonkers, but that's kind of the gist of it. So because these two characters got separated, the time dilation is kind of the reason, you know, that I explain in the story for why one person arrives at their destination 50 years before another person does. It also, because the story's called Genesis, it does have a kind of interesting twist involving the biblical book of Genesis. Not trying to offend anybody by, you know, rewriting part of the Bible or anything like that. It's more just like, oh wow, this is a really interesting idea, and let me play around with these characters and kind of explain another way that these events could have transpired. Is kind of the goal there. So if you check it out, Genesis, that one's on Vocal and Substack. Let me know what you think. All right, next up is another poem, actually. I was wrong, 2 poems. This poem is called A Version of Me, and it's on Vocal, to be TBD on Substack. This one is a piece about the masks that we wear and the version of ourselves that we show the world in comparison to the version that exists inside of us. And I'll just say that and move on, because I know this is already getting pretty long, but if you feel like you're the kind of person where it's hard to be yourself around people, even around friends and family, I think this poem will resonate with you. So that one's called A Version of Me. Next up, we've got a horror flash fiction called The Not Deer. This one's on Vocal. I really had fun with this one. It's inspired by Appalachian lore, specifically a cryptid called the Not Deer. And as the name implies, it looks like a deer, but it's not a deer. And so this horror flash fiction piece is really cool. The entire piece is structured around the phrase, "It all happened so fast." So you see that phrase kind of repeat throughout as the story goes on. It's not very long, but I've been told it has great tension and really kind of builds up the suspense. So that's called The Not Deer. You'll find that on Vocal. Next up, 2 stories that got published this week on Substack that I wanted to mention. The first one's called Widowmaker, and the second one that I published earlier today is called Precious Cargo. Both of these stories were originally published about 4 years ago on Vocal for separate kind of contests on there, neither of which placed or anything, but it was fun to go back and look at these stories, and the reason why I published them on Substack, in addition to just trying to give them a second lease on life, is I wanted to take the opportunity to read through them again with everything that I've learned in the last 4 years and see if there's a way to improve them. So with the case of Widowmaker, that one actually has a brand new ending that goes, I would say, 10-15% past where it originally left off, and I think closes things out on a little bit more of a thematically appropriate note. And then Precious Cargo, that one I had a lot of fun coming back to because I was able to add in some breadcrumb details that connect it to the wider horror mythos that I'm building. And that'll be its own segment on the podcast, I'm sure, eventually. But if you ever become a fan of me and you go back and read Precious Cargo, I would love to see if anybody kind of spotted those little clues about it existing within that wider mythos that I'm trying to build. And I also added some extended scenes in Precious Cargo that were designed to give it a little bit more clarity around the story. It's kind of a mind twister of a story, if you will. And I would love to hear what you think about that if you get a chance to read it. All right. Last one, I promise. Well, sorry, there's 2 actually, so it's not a promise. You can tell that I don't script these very, very much in detail, but I'm hoping that the casual nature of it makes it easier to listen to. So the second to last one is the story that I believe I mentioned last week on the podcast called The Unfathomable Beast of Xanadu 4, Love that title. This particular one was split into 3 parts on Substack because it didn't do very well on Vocal originally. So I thought, hey, let's try it again. New imagery, a little bit tighter editing, and split it into 3 parts. And it went very well. They all got more reads. Each part got more reads than the entirety of the story on Vocal. So I think splitting it up was the right call. And then I also got a wonderful piece of feedback from Brianna, who I mentioned earlier. And she left a comment that said, "The way you leverage dialogue as an asset rather than a requirement crushes, dude. That scene between Johnny and the creature as Selena shows exactly what I mean. The raw desperation in Johnny's stop wearing her face against her calculated manipulation. You're not just checking boxes with your dialogue, you're making it do real work. Like, we feel Johnny breaking down and seeing right through this thing's mind games without you ever having to spell it out. The whole exchange feels like this tense psychological dance rather than just characters talking. Really impressive stuff." Thank you so much, Brianna, for that feedback. And one thing I'll say, too, is that another one of the writers, Spencer, that I mentioned at the beginning on Substack, also left a great comment in regards to feedback for my Widowmaker story. I don't have it in front of me, unfortunately, but his comment was regarding the story's sort of structure when it comes to the more intense scenes. He wanted it to be a little bit more chaotic, which I agree with. And when you read the story, you'll understand why chaos would be good in terms of the action there. And then he also he had some other feedback that is escaping my mind right now. Point is, it was great feedback, and I think we all as writers should be very comfortable with giving feedback to other writers. It's just a matter of being respectful. And I also like to take a balanced approach to the feedback. So if I'm critiquing someone's story, I'll start by telling them what I liked, right? And then I'll tell them what I think could be better. And I think if you approach it that way, more often than not, you won't get any hostility back from the writer. It's one of those things where when I was younger, I'll be honest, if anybody tried to critique one of my stories, I would just immediately get defensive. It happens. We're human. But as I've grown as a writer, I've really begun to understand how important feedback is. And, no matter what form it takes, even if you get bad reviews on Amazon, if you're self-publishing a book, like these things, they hurt in the moment, but it's important to grow a thick skin and really, allow it to improve you as a writer and inform what you do next. And that's easier said than done, but just wanted to point that out real quick. Okay. And the last thing, as far as our weekly recap goes here, is the 1-a-day reading challenge for writers post that I did on Substack. So this one was really fun. I'm the kind of person where whenever I have some free time, I'm always on, social media platforms, several of them, probably too many. But I get on there and I love hunting down writers who've just posted something new, or maybe they posted like a promo about their book, or they posted a snippet of a poem, or an excerpt from their story that they're working on, whatever it may be. I love finding other writers, and especially the ones where it just got posted, or it's been posted for a few hours or even a day or two, and they, nobody's really said anything. It just kind of got thrown out into the void. I like to jump into those situations and be the person to be like, hey, I took a second, I looked at what you got, here's what I think. And when people do that for me, it's the greatest feeling in the world. It literally makes my day, or even my week in some cases. And so I kind of wanted to do that for other writers and, be that person to be like, hey, you're not just throwing this into the void. People are looking at it, even if they don't have the time to really stop and, give you feedback. It's not for nothing, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so this particular post that I did, I wanted to challenge other writers, and including anyone listening to this podcast, to once per day, whenever you have some free time, find another writer's work somewhere in whatever form it may be, and specifically somewhere where you can leave a like and a comment, and just engage with it. Take a look, focus on something shorter if you don't have a lot of time, like a poem or a short story, but take a look, leave some feedback. And, by doing that, you're going to not only, be a contributing member of the writing community, which is already an incredible group of people, but at the same time, you're going to make that writer's day. And I say that because that's how I feel. So I wrote that post with that in mind. And another motivation of it too was I wanted to highlight just the sheer amount of positivity that I've seen, especially in recent weeks and months, on social media when it comes to the writing community. I'm not going to sit here and try and tell you that social media is a positive place, that people are always talking about nice things and being nice to one another, because we know that's not true. I mean, one of the reasons I left Twitter, not calling it X, is because it became such a toxic place, right? And so I go to other places like Substack, Blue Sky, even Threads, and I know Meta and Threads and Instagram, has their own completely different problem that I do not have the time to get into right now, because it would require an in-depth discussion, let's be honest. But putting all that aside, in general on social media, if you're zoomed in on just the writing community, people are just so positive and so uplifting and so supportive. And I wanted to highlight that. So in this article, the Writing Challenge on Substack, I also highlighted a number of writers who I mentioned at the beginning of the episode here. I took some screenshots of some of their posts and some of their comments and just kind of created a collage and was like, hey, here's an example. Like, I'm putting my money where my mouth is, right? This is an example of how writers are always just positive, uplifting, supportive people. Yes, you're going to have outliers. Yes, you're going to have trolls. But the vast majority of people in the writing community are phenomenal human beings. And so I wanted to shout that out as well. And that's why I tagged a bunch of people whose post that I borrowed as part of that post. And it's been great. Love the feedback on the article so far. Love the positivity. I'm going to be writing a version of it for Vocal that I'll discuss in the next section here. Okay, next up, let's talk about project updates. So, as I mentioned in the first episode, my main projects this year, beyond what I'm doing on Substack and Vocal, is I'm working on an animated series called The Chronicles of Clenchport, and I'm also working on my novel, the first in a trilogy, called For Those About to Vote. So here's some quick updates on that. As far as the novel goes, I was able to work on it this week. My current focus in the novel is I'm actually adding a sixth POV. So that's why, in the past I said I had 5 POVs. There's going to be a sixth one. And I promise no more than that. I'm not going to go crazy here, more than I already am. And this new POV is Alice Faden is her name. And she is an astronaut. And the reason why I added her is because I wanted somebody to give us a boots on the ground view of what happens in the book regarding this asteroid that kind of kicks off the entire series, right? And so I felt really good about it. I wrote a brand new chapter 1 from Alice's perspective where she's being briefed on it. She's one of the first people on Earth to find out about this asteroid. It's all very hush-hush. And that all went well. Then I got to chapter 2, which is also from her perspective. And then in that one, she's supposed to be on the International Space Station. Very cool. Nice setting. Here's the problem. I'm not an astronaut. So I had to start Googling like crazy and doing research and diving down rabbit holes. And one thing I will say is that there is a Google Earth sort of virtual tour of the International Space Station that's very cool. So shout out to Google for that. It's really neat. But just a reminder that whenever you come up with ideas like this, there is a price to be paid in the form of time and research. So keep that in mind. In terms of the animated series, The Chronicles of Clenchport, as I've mentioned before, that is going to be a transmedia property, meaning that it's going to exist across multiple mediums and in different forms to kind of create this sort of meta story across everything. So it's going to be an animated series, including animated shorts as well that we're currently working on. We have a small team going. And then on separate from that, there's going to be a podcast that's set in the town of Clenchport, Virginia. And in the podcast, we hear from 2 different radio hosts who are lifelong residents of Clenchport, and they basically kind of tell you stories about Clenchport's past and local legends and such. And there's another element of it where each episode they do is split into 2 parts, side A and side B. So in side A, you'll hear about the regular story from the town's history. In side B, and I won't spoil how they do this because it's explained in the podcast, but in side B, they actually kind of play through their studio there recordings of the same topic from alternate universes. So let me give you an example. In the first episode, side A is about how Clenchport was founded. In side B, you hear 3 different stories of this recorded audio of how Clenchport was founded in other parallel universes. It's very cool, Very excited to launch that soon, but there's a lot more that goes into that podcast than just recording and a bit of editing like what you hear here. So it's going to take a little bit longer. Okay, next up is our weekly writing topic discussion, and this is where I talk about something involving writing in general and my thoughts on it, and you'll most likely hear more about it in an upcoming article on Substack and Vocal. This week I'm talking about imposter syndrome. Oh yeah, that one. It happens to every writer. It doesn't matter how successful you are. I guarantee Stephen King has imposter syndrome. I guarantee that George R.R. Martin and his inability to finish the book is giving him imposter syndrome. And I guarantee that other writers, myself included, who are at all different levels of fame and success in their career, everyone experiences imposter syndrome. So let me just give you something right off the bat that I see a lot, and I want to just clear it up right now. You are a writer, okay? Doesn't matter if you're published. Doesn't matter if you're an indie author. Doesn't matter if all you have is just a bunch of documents on Google Drive. Doesn't matter if all of your writing exists in a composition book like mine did when I was a kid. You are a writer. The act of writing makes you a writer. So shut that down immediately when your imposter syndrome starts acting up. That's number one. Number two, we're always our own worst critics, especially writers and artists. People will sit there and look at your work and think it's the greatest thing in the world, and they'll tell you too, but you won't believe it yourself. You'll always have that voice in your head that's saying, no, you know what, it's not as good as it could be, or this isn't my best work, or so on and so forth. Do your best not to listen to that voice. We all have it. It's part of being an artist, but it's not true, okay? It's good to have some sort of introspection around getting better, about receiving feedback, around improving your craft, but at the end of the day, you are your own worst critic, so be nice. And then the other thing that I'll say about imposter syndrome is be positive. And what I mean by that is you don't have to be positive about your own work, because at a certain point that starts to toe the line towards arrogance. And the last thing I think any of us want to be is perceived as arrogant. But be positive in terms of how you interact online and with the writing community. As I said earlier, the writing community is incredible, super supportive, always positive, happy to help each other out, provide feedback. So do that. Do the challenge that I mentioned earlier. Find something once per day and interact with it, and interact with your fellow writers. And what that will do is it'll create positivity in your mind and all around you. And that's going to ultimately keep that imposter syndrome at bay, because you'll realize that everybody's going through it just like you. And like they say, misery loves company. Next thing I'll say, here's another tip. If none of that works and you're still feeling the imposter syndrome, go back and read something that you did like, that you wrote. Something that you've always said, you know what, that was a really good piece that I did. Go back and find that. Keep it handy, maybe on a folder, or, if it's written down in a journal or something, keep it handy. And whenever that imposter syndrome starts sneaking up on you, find that thing and read it. And think to yourself, yeah, you know what, this is really good. I am a writer. I am a good writer. And just that will help kind of keep it at bay. And on that same note, I would also recommend, I did this when I created my collage of the kind of tribute to the writing community, is have a folder on your computer that you use for screenshots of positive feedback that you've received, or positive kind of posts and affirmations that you've seen from other writers. Whenever you're out and about on the internet, when you see that kind of stuff, just grab a screenshot real quick, toss it in that folder, and treat it as sort of like a break in case of emergency type thing. If you start feeling down on yourself as a writer, or down on writing in general, just give that folder a quick open, scroll through those screenshots, and remind yourself that, again, we're all in this together. Stay tuned. I'll do an article on this with these tips and more on Substack and Vocal, and we'll get a little bit deeper into imposter syndrome. But for now, those are my thoughts. All right, our next section is my gaming and podcast recommendations. So this week, as I mentioned earlier, I've been spending a lot of my free time writing, which not a bad thing. But the time that I haven't been writing, I've been playing a new game called, well, it's not new, but it's new to me. It's called Kena, Bridge of Spirits. I always forget how it's pronounced. This game came out a few years ago. I bought it right when it came out because I saw the trailers, saw the reviews, and I was immediately hooked. I just got distracted. I mean, if you're a gamer like me, you know how bad the backlog can be. So this one's been in the backlog for a while. Just started playing it, and I am absolutely in love so far. The studio, if I'm not mistaken, was actually an animation studio, and we're talking like Pixar quality animation here. And so this was their first game, but it's like you can see their animation roots in the cutscenes in particular. It's incredible. And on that note, the graphics are amazing. It just looks so good. I mean, this is the kind of thing you could easily see coming from Pixar, DreamWorks, Sony Animation, stuff like that. So as a result, I've been taking a lot of screenshots. Yeah, I love that about the PS5. You can hit a button and take screenshots. And while the game doesn't have a dedicated photo mode, I have been able to finagle it and kind of get some really good clips here and there. And I have to give a shout out to the music, too. The music is like beautiful, orchestral, just stunning soundtrack. The gameplay is just kind of like your classic action sort of hack and slash type thing. And you have these little creatures with you called the Rot. And despite the name, they're adorable. And they help you out in the combat as well. And the story seems to be pretty emotional so far. I haven't gotten crazy far into it, but it seems to be, kind of dealing with loss, with grief, things like that. But the world itself is very lush and beautiful and seems to have a lot going on. So excited to get into that. And as far as podcasts go, this week, I'm just kind of going off of what I've been listening to. So once again, I will shout out Astonishing Legends, phenomenal podcast. The two hosts are just genuinely cool guys, very down to earth, and they have a whole team of researchers, and they really just go super in depth into the stories that they're telling. And it's conspiracy theories, it's urban legends, it's supernatural type stuff. Usually what I do is I'll just scroll through the list of episodes and find something that jumps out at me as far as a topic goes and just pop it on while I'm cooking dinner, doing the dishes, or even working sometimes. So Astonishing Legends, can't recommend it enough. Welcome to Night Vale and Good Morning Night Vale are two other podcasts that I would highly recommend. The first one is a podcast about a fictional town in Arizona, I believe, called Night Vale. I was very much inspired by this podcast to write what I'm doing with Clenchport in that series. It's very surreal and weird, but also charming and wonderful. And it really gets into some very relatable themes as it goes on. There's hundreds of episodes, so definitely plenty to keep you busy. Good Morning Night Vale is a companion podcast that's hosted by several of the voice actors who perform in the main series. And in this companion podcast, they discuss the episodes one by one and kind of talk about behind the scenes type stuff. They're just wonderful people and they're really fun to listen to. From the creators of the Night Vale podcasts, I would also recommend once again a podcast called Start With This. This one is the two creators of Night Vale, the main writers, talking about writing. And unfortunately, the podcast isn't going on anymore, but the episodes they did are phenomenal. And there's some incredibly good advice about writing in general in there. So I would, again, recommend that one. And a new podcast that I'll recommend this week as well is called Time Suck with the comedian Dan Cummins. And if you've never heard Dan Cummins' comedy, it's very, very funny. The guy just has a great voice, a really good eye for comedic timing, and just really kind of offbeat, topics and discussion. But it lands for me every time. So that's a good one too. Okay, if you made it this far, thank you so much. Really appreciate you listening. Cannot thank you enough. Your support means everything. We're up to our last section here for the week. And in this section, I talk about what I'm working on in the coming week and some of my goals for the coming week as well. And we'll obviously come back around to these on next week's episode. Expect new episodes every Friday on Substack and Spotify. All right, so this coming week, what are we doing? We're going to try and finish those opening 2 chapters for those about to vote, if I can somehow get through all of that research. But that's what I'm hoping. And then once those 2 chapters are done, we're going to jump back to where I left off in the current version of the manuscript, which is a chapter featuring one of the POVs named Claire Garland, to kind of say some stuff without spoiling. In the chapter where I left off, she has basically, after being, sort of thrown to the side by her insurance company due to her cancer diagnosis, she's decided to join some clinical trials that will be leveraging the alien parasite in some way, shape, or form. Sounds crazy, but she's also at her wit's end and running out of time. So that's where we left off. We're going to join her for those clinical trials and see what's going on there. Also, next week, I want to check out a new unofficial writing challenge on Vocal issued by a writer named Amanda Stark. I just saw this today. She is challenging people to go and find a poem from the past that didn't do too well originally when it released, and she wants you to take a fresh look at it, revamp it, and rewrite it, which I think is amazing because that's what I did this week with some of my old works. So I want to see if I can enter that challenge next week. I've got a poem in mind. The idea I think was pretty good. The concept back then was to do a poem where every stanza was one of the 5 senses, and it was supposed to be an examination of love and loss. I don't think it really landed, and it clearly didn't because it didn't do too well, so I'm thinking about using that one as the basis for this unofficial challenge. So I will update you on that next week. And another thing that I want to do next week that I'm really excited about is an article on Vocal, and it's a celebratory article as well as kind of a reflection piece. I joined Vocal back in 2021, and as of July, I believe, of this year, it's going to be 4 years that I've been publishing on this platform. And it has grown immensely since I joined. New features have been added. The community's grown. It's a great place. If you want to check it out, it's just vocal.media. Great website, wonderful community. But I've been on there 4 years now, and in the last couple of months / year, I've gotten most of my kind of lifetime reads on Vocal, but we're coming up, as of today, I had 999 reads across all of my stories and poems on there. So I imagine in the next day or two, fingers crossed, I'll be getting that 1,000th read. And so I'm really excited to do a piece where we look back on the 4 years and 1,000 reads, talk about what I've learned, how I've grown, and what's in the future. So I'm really excited about doing that. That'll be coming out this week, most likely. And then also this coming week, I know I'm throwing a lot of ideas on myself here, but I mean, as you can see, I'm usually pretty productive. So next week, I also want to see about getting the next episode of the Clenchport podcast written that I mentioned. I have 4 episodes so far, which is essentially 2 topics with a side A and side B episode each. So we're going to be starting a brand new story with this 5th episode. And this one's going to be inspired by a story that you may or may not have heard about a person named Mel who once called into Coast to Coast AM, if you're familiar with that, with Art Bell. This was a real sort of story that happened where this person named Mel called and talked about this hole that he had on his property. And it's a strange story about the hole potentially being otherworldly in nature, bottomless even. The podcast that I mentioned earlier, Astonishing Legends, did a phenomenal series on Mel's Hole is the name of the story. If you Google Mel's Hole, you'll find about all kinds of stuff about this crazy story involving a hole in the ground. So the next episode of the Clenchport podcast, I'm going to come up with a fictional version of that from Clenchport's history, where at some point on somebody's property, probably near the edge of town, discovered a hole in the ground that had mysterious properties, and we'll examine what happened in our universe as well as alternate universes in the side B version of the episode. So probably I think a safe bet is to say I'll write side A next week, given everything else going on. And last thing, I promise. Today I heard about a writing group that's mostly virtual called Broadleaf Writers. This was informed to me by Odessa Blaine, one of the writers that I called out earlier. She mentioned it to me in one of the comments of a Substack article that she was on. And basically, you can become a member, but they also offer the ability for non-members to kind of once a year sit in on one of their meetings and see what you think. So I went ahead and registered, and that's happening next week. I can talk about it on next week's podcast. The actual meeting, I think, is Thursday. And it sounds like they're doing kind of a roundtable discussion about, staying up to date with your writing projects and meeting your goals. So I'm really excited to check it out. And thanks again to Odessa for recommending it. Like I said, we'll talk about it next week. All right, folks. Well, it has been wonderful, as always. Thank you if you stayed this entire time. I know this episode is a bit longer. Trying not to make them any longer than this, but hey, I got a lot to talk about, and when it comes to writing, I always say I'm a man of far too many words. And with that, thank you so much for listening. This has been the Saved as Draft podcast. I'm Bradley Ramsey. Have a good week.